So how do you master your sugar burner system? Now, if you want more context, I am a huge fan of giving you probably more information than you'll ever want to know on this topic. But I have written a whole book. It's called Eat Like a Girl. And I have lists and much of what I'm talking about here in protocols in that book. So those of you that are interested in diving into that, I also have some incredible recipes that will really help you bring back this relationship with food and help you see that you can be an incredibly efficient sugar burner and your taste buds will be very, very happy. So there's over 100 recipes in that book that fit into the teachings here. Know that that is a resource for you. Okay, so let's start with this. How do you know you're operating from your sugar burner system? Now, we talked about this, and I talked about when your blood sugar rises, that is the moment that you are now clicked into the sugar burner system. So it is definitely a rise in glucose. What I want to pause before I talk about all the different foods and how they affect this rise in glucose is I want you to understand that we can have external increases in glucose and we can have internal increases in glucose. And this is important because an external increase in glucose means I ate something, I drank something that made my blood sugar rise. That activates the sugar burner system. But as many of you will dive into these teachings and will use glucose monitors, you're going to see, and I'll talk about by the way, I'll talk about the glucose monitor because some of you are going to want to go down those paths. But you're going to see that there are moments throughout your day where you haven't eaten anything and you're going to have a spike in your blood sugar. And this can happen from stress, and this can happen from exercise. That's a big one that increases glucose. And sometimes you'll see that this actually happens when you sleep. That in the middle of the night, as you are sleeping, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, you might get a blood sugar dump, and you wake up the next morning and you see, oh my gosh, my blood sugar went up while I was sleeping. That would be an internal spike of blood sugar. Internal spikes of blood sugar typically do not pull you out of a fat burner state. They do not activate your sugar burner system. I know that's really nuanced. I know it's a little bit confusing, but it's really important for those of you that are going to dive deeper into these teachings that when we eat or we drink something, that activates the sugar burner system. When we exercise or when we have a dump from our liver getting rid of stored sugar, that doesn't activate the sugar burner system, but they both cause blood sugar spikes. So an advanced technique that you're getting a hold of here early on in this course. So what does cause this blood sugar to rise? And the first thing I want to just say that your goal throughout a day when you are in your sugar burner state, your eating window, is that you want minimal blood sugar spikes. And here's how we look at food. When you look at food, I want you to think in terms of macros. Macros stands for macronutrients. And there are 3 major macronutrients: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Carbohydrates are going to spike your blood sugar the most. Protein will spike your blood sugar the next highest, and fat many times doesn't spike your blood sugar at all. Maybe a little bit, but in some of the people I've seen is it actually can lower your blood sugar. So these different types of food, and I'll talk about what they are, have a different response on your blood sugar. For those of you who have been counting calories your whole life, I just want to point out that the calorie counting process has failed you because it didn't have that next part of the conversation, which was What is making up those calories? Is it carbohydrates, protein, or fat? So calorie counting falls apart because we're not addressing the quality of these calories. When you look at a carbohydrate, I want you to ask yourself, is this a simple carbohydrate or a complex carbohydrate? A simple carbohydrate are your refined flours and sugars. The best way to know if it's a simple carbohydrate is to look at that food and ask yourself, has it been altered by a human? Was it made in a lab? I'm going to give you an example of one. Flour. Yes, wheat comes from the ground, but it had to then come out. You had to take the wheat and take it into a lab to refine it down and distill it down into a more simple form. That's why it's called simple carbohydrate. And it is those simple carbohydrates that spike your blood sugar the most. So even if they're organic, for my friends out there that are, but I've been eating healthy my whole life. I eat all organic, whole wheat, non-GMO, beautiful. I applaud you. It's still a simple carbohydrate, and it's going to spike your blood sugar really high. The problem with high spiking blood sugar is as high as your blood sugar goes, is as low as it's going to crash. So for my hangry friends, those of you that are like, I can't go without food, a lot of the reason for that is because you're eating these simple carbohydrates that give you a burst of energy, but you don't realize that there's a crash coming at the end. It's a little bit like a hangover. When we're drinking, we're not thinking about the next day. And then the next day, we're like, oh God, why did I drink so much? So the same thing is happening when we eat these simple carbohydrates. We're addicted to them. We love them. We go to eat them, but we're not thinking, oh my God, an hour from now, I might be hungry. So I want you to start to look at these simple carbohydrates. They're usually your flours. They're usually your sugars. They're anything that has been ultra processed and taken away from its original form, and it is human made. Those are going to be the most challenging to your metabolic system. They're going to make fasting the hardest thing possible for you. And so we want to be sure that we don't end up with these huge blood sugar spikes from these simple carbohydrates, as opposed to what we call a complex carbohydrate. And a complex carbohydrate is the nature made it. It has fiber in it. A great example of a complex carbohydrate is an apple. An apple, a lot of people who got into looking at their metabolic health and they got all into the keto world, people started fearing fruit. I'm not going to have you fearing fruit. I want you eating fruit. There's a lot of great reasons to eat fruit. But some fruit has more fiber in it than other fruit. So whenever we have fiber slows down our blood sugar spikes. So if you've been doing any macro counting of carbohydrates because you decided to go keto, or you didn't even really, you were just like, oh, I know carbohydrates aren't good, I would like to be the first person here to tell you that I don't put carbohydrates into the bad category. I put simple carbohydrates into the bad category, and I put complex carbohydrates into the good category. We want fiber in it. It is your fruits. It is your vegetables. This can even be some of your ancient grains. A lot of you have gotten really into looking at grains from new lenses. This can be your beans, legumes, are an incredible complex carbohydrate. Whatever nature made and wasn't completely altered by man is going to be a beautiful carbohydrate. Okay, have you been watching my videos and you're like, I don't know how to put this stuff all together? You might need my fasting lifestyle free course. I'll teach you exactly how to do it. Just click on the link above. It'll take it to you, and it's absolutely free. My gift to you. The second macro that we have is protein. Now, protein is the second one that gives you this blood sugar spike. And when there's protein, we break that down into plant-based versus animal-based. And I am not opposed to plant-based. I'm not opposed to veganism. A lot of you that are plant-based and have made that choice, it's a very ethical decision. And I understand it. I was vegetarian for almost 10 years in my 20s. I was not a healthy vegetarian because I didn't understand the process that I'm teaching you. I was eating all simple carbohydrates, which was throwing off my whole metabolic system. So if you are a plant-based human, I would encourage you to really make sure that most of your carbohydrates, by the way, are coming more from these nature-made complex carbohydrates. But when we look at protein, what's interesting about protein through the plant-based lens is that protein from a plant-based lens has a little bit of a carbohydrate in it. And so it's going to spike your blood sugar a little bit higher than an animal-based protein that doesn't have as much of a carbohydrate load. So plant-based proteins are obviously your legumes. If you're like, wait a second, you said legumes and the carbohydrates. Yes, a plant-based protein can have some carbohydrate component to it. So these are going to be your beans, which are amazing. These are going to be your nuts and your seeds. There's a lot of vegetables that have protein in them, and I map those out in Eat Like a Girl. So there's anything that grew from the ground and came to us in a plant-based version, as opposed to animal-based. And animal-based obviously is what it says. It had to have come from an animal or is an animal. And with animal-based, one of the things, just like with plant-based, I don't want you doing the simple carbohydrate protein combo for plant-based. With animal-based, I want you to always think about clean animals. This is your organic meats. These are your grass-fed beef. This is your grass-fed eggs. We have also gotten to a point where we have pushed in to our animals a lot of toxins, a lot of antibiotics, a lot of growth hormone, and that has caused problems for those of us that have eaten that. So you want clean, organic animal meat or eggs. If you do eggs or you do milk, you want it to come from an organic source. But protein is really important. I'll be going through this in more detail here in a moment. Now, the third macronutrient is fat. And fat, I really want you to also think of there is good fat and there is bad fat. And inflammatory fat, I've already mentioned that. I won't dive into it even more, but it is your corn oil, it is your canola oil, your vegetable oil, it is your partially hydrogenated oils. By the way, on the partially hydrogenated oils, our FDA, I just got to take a side note on this because this is another pet peeve of mine here in America. The FDA had partially hydrogenated oils in our food system, and they realized that it was a major contributor to cardiovascular disease. And they realized this like over 10 years ago. And so they went to the food industry and they said, hey, you need to get these partially hydrogenated oils out of the food system, but we're going to give you close to 15 years to get it out. It wasn't an immediate removal. It was 15 years. And in that time, these partially hydrogenated oils have been inflaming people's body, leading to cardiovascular disease. This is where our food system is not protecting us. So these inflammatory fats are absolutely harmful. And way back in the 1970s, when we were talking about going low fat or fat free, what should have happened in that conversation should have been this conversation that you're about to get right now. There are bad fats and there are good fats. Bad fats will destroy your health. Good fats will amplify your health. So a good fat is your avocado oil, your olive oil, amazing fat. This can be some of like sesame oils. This is MCT oil. This is coconut oil. These are good fats. That outer membrane of the cell that I talked about, the bilipid membrane of that cell, they are nourished by good fats. So if you want to bring back that cellular energy, if you want to get yourself out of insulin resistance, you're going to want to lean into good fats. Now, something interesting about these macronutrients is some of you might have heard of what is called a glycemic index of foods. I still really like the glycemic index of foods. It is a measurement of what foods will do to your blood sugar. So as you're learning this, if you do not have a glucose monitor that you put on or you're using, you could look at a food like a carrot, let's say, and you're like, oh, I eat lots of carrots. I want to see what it does to my glucose. And you could go and look up the glycemic index of food. And it will show you exactly how high it will spike your blood sugar. So I wanted to point that out as that is a resource for you. Now, with these macronutrients, I want to talk about how you put a meal together, because whenever I put a meal together, these three come in my mind all the time. Even with complex carbohydrates, I don't eat carbs by themselves. If I'm going to do a banana, I'm going to put a fat on it to stop the blood sugar spike. If I eat organic corn tortillas, which I have been known to eat, I'm going to make sure that I've got some guacamole on that and maybe some protein, put some shredded chicken in there. So how you put a meal together really affects the blood sugar spike. And so this is what it looks like. When you're looking at a plate, ask yourself, is nature's carbs here? So that's going to be fruits and vegetables, maybe potatoes, sweet potatoes that you're going to hear me talk a lot about. Is there a protein here? So if you're plant-based, that's got to be some beans or maybe some tofu or some tempeh. And what kind of fat do I have here? A lot of times I've become recently obsessed with olive oil. I'll just drizzle olive oil all over a meal. So every meal I eat, whether it's a minor meal or a big meal, it has to have a protein, it has to have a nature's carbs, and it has to have a healthy fat. It doesn't matter how small or how big the meal.
I know you're struggling to lose weight. It may be your fasting length. So in this video, I'm going to show you the perfect fasting length to unstick weight loss. In fact, it's such an incredible tool for weight loss. I think you should start with fasting before you change your food to be able to get into that door in for losing weight.